ABC's coverage of the Democratic National Convention live from Denver, Colorado. Where in about 5 minutes, the process will begin that will result with Joe Biden being nominated as the Democrats' choice for vice president.
As we await for that, let's go to Norah O'Donnell and the panel.
All right, Preston Keith, thank you. That's right. The dream team is back as we talk about these A-listers who spoke tonight. Bill Clinton, Joe Biden, we're expecting to speak any minute from this convention. Rachel, Bill Clinton's speech tonight. It seemed to me, and going back over it again, it was more about an embrace of Barack Obama. He will do everything he can to elect Barack Obama. Obama is the man for this job. He said, ready to lead, ready to preserve, protect, and defend, ready to be president.
Yeah.
Will the gutting of John McCain be left to John Kerry, as it was earlier, and Joe Biden?
Well, I do think that there was a lot of red meat in Clinton's speech. I think that when Clinton talked about, as I said, Katrina, torture, cronyism, the most unequal America we've had since the 1920s, he's talking about the Bush legacy. He's putting it right on McCain. And certainly there's ways to go at it more directly. John Kerry speaking earlier today was brutal. Kerry said, when John McCain stood on the deck of an aircraft carrier 3 months after 9/11 and proclaimed, next up, Baghdad, Barack Obama saw even then an occupation of undetermined length, undetermined cost, undetermined consequences that would only fan the flames in the Middle East. Well, guess what, Kerry said? Mission accomplished. That sort of going right at him, not saying the Bush legacy, but going right after McCain and what he has done wrong. We'll get more of that tonight.
What about that, Pat?
McCain has skated free this entire convention, in my judgment.
Skated free?
Skated free. He certainly has. Look, Bill Clinton started off tonight. That crowd was ready to rock and roll. It was cheering for 5 minutes. He had to silence them, and it was a fairly listless response at the end. And look, as Rachel says, he just touched on Katrina, torture, cronyism, and the crowd started rising. And yet they've never given them anything, the red meat they want. Has anybody heard the word Guantanamo mentioned this entire convention? They're not doing the job that they ought to be doing for their party. What happened to the fighting liberalism of yesterday?
Yeah, but John Kerry talked about his changing on tax cuts and climate change and all of that. We're going to talk more about that.
What did I say about...
Beau Biden is coming to the stage now to introduce his father. So I'm going to send it back to Chris and Keith for all of that. Back to you guys upstairs.
All right, let's go directly out to the floor of the Pepsi Center. I think that's the easiest way to do it, Norah. Let's go out to the Pepsi Center right now. Go ahead.
By her ex-boyfriend. Violence against women often happens in the shadows, out of public view. Since that time, I've devoted my life to bringing it into the light. But I realized that sometimes to change lives, you have to change the law. Joe Biden understands. In 1994, he wrote the Violence Against Women Act, so every woman would have a place to turn for support. He's constantly making sure it has the funding it needs. And today, countless women get a second chance at life because of Joe Biden. So, in memory of my sister, and in the name of women of all across this country, I am proud to place into nomination the name of Joe Biden to be our next vice president. Yes! Yes! Thank you.
She is Quincy Lewis. She's a school teacher from Delaware who gave we did not know the name of the person who was to nominate Joe Biden. There will be a seconding speech as well, and then Senator Biden will be introduced by his own son, Beau Biden, the Attorney General of Delaware. Here is Speaker Pelosi.
The name of Joe Biden of Delaware has been placed in nomination as the Democratic Party's vice presidential candidate. Is there a second? The chair will entertain a motion to suspend the rules and to nominate by acclamation Joe Biden as the Democratic Party's vice presidential candidate. No. Is there a second? All those those in favor to suspend the rules and nominate Joe Biden by acclamation, please say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Joe Biden has been selected by nomination to be the Democratic nominee for the United States of America. Pursuant to Rule C-11 of the Convention's Rules of Procedure, Senator Biden has been invited to make an acceptance speech. I have been asked to inform you that Senator Biden has accepted the nomination.
My dad used to have an expression. You don't measure success on whether or not you've been knocked down. It's how quickly you get back up, because everybody gets knocked down. The measure is getting back up. That's the story of this country. It has never failed to get back up.
Joe is salt of the earth. He's somebody who hasn't forgotten the people in those communities where he grew up.
People in my neighborhood don't like the phrase working class. The guys I grew up with, their mothers mostly didn't work back in those days, and their fathers didn't go to college, but they were proud. And if you asked them what they were middle class.
My dad tells it like it is. From the time he was a kid in Scranton, who people made fun of because he stuttered, to a young man who gets elected to the United States Senate when he was 29 years old, starts a campaign no one thought they could win.
The thing that I'm proudest of is the fact that the people in the state of Delaware have elected me 6 times in a row because I think they believe I haven't lost their voice.
My dad experienced great triumph along with my family, but also great tragedy. Losing my mom and my sister in an automobile accident that my brother and I survived. What my dad did then was he came to my bedside and my brother's, and he's never left it.
When Joe was just elected, he made the commitment to take the train every single day to be home with the children. And no matter where he is or what he's doing, if one of the children call, he stops and takes the call.
I had 4 children. I lost one, but I have 3 lovely children. They're each other's best friends.
He's a wonderful father. He's an exceptional grandfather. And that's really what it's about for him.
There are very few people who have the depth of experience of Joe Biden, not only as the head of the Judiciary Committee, as the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, but he's also been at the forefront on critical legislation.
The things I'm most proud of in my career are writing and passing the Violence Against Women Act. We brought down violent crime with the crime bill that I drafted.
Joe has unequaled foreign policy credentials. He's consulted with presidents, has personal relationships with many world leaders. He's somebody who, on the Iraq War, was willing to speak out, and when he saw that the Bush administration wasn't using that authority properly.
When you see the abuse of power, you've got to speak. Whether it's a parent slapping around a child, or a president taking a nation to war that cost lives that was not a necessary war. That's abuse of power.
Joe is truly a leader, and I think he has such strength of character. I think people know that they can believe in him. They know that he wants change, and I think they know that the country will change with Barack Obama and Joe Biden.
The most important thing that Joe offers is his honesty. And I can't imagine a more effective advocate in the vice presidency to bring about the changes that we need here in America.
The middle class in this country has never been as unsure of their future, and we've never been as isolated. And if we don't change that in the next 4 years, we're locked in for a decade. And Barack Obama has been very explicit about how he's going to level the playing field for the firemen and the cops and the linemen and the salespersons and the nurses to improve their circumstance so their next generation is better off than they were. I think Barack and I will work as a team great. I can hardly wait to help him turn this country around.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Delaware Attorney General, Captain Beau Biden.
Good evening. I'm Beau Biden, and Joe Biden is my dad. Many of you know him as a distinguished and accomplished senator. I know him as an incredible father and a loving grandfather, a man who hustled home to Delaware after the last vote so he wouldn't miss me and my brother's games, who after returning from some war-torn region of the world would tiptoe literally into our rooms and kiss us goodnight, who turns down some fancy cocktail party in Washington so he won't miss my daughter Natalie's birthday. The truth is, he almost wasn't a senator at all. In 1972, shortly after his improbable victory, but before he took the oath of office, my father went to Washington to look at his new office space. My mom took us to go buy a Christmas tree. On the way home, we were in an automobile accident. My mom, Nelia, and my sister, Naomi, were killed. My brother, Hunter, and I were seriously injured and hospitalized for weeks. I was just short of 4 years old. One of my earliest memories was being in that hospital, my dad always at our side. We, my brother and I, not the Senate, were all that he cared about. He decided not to take the oath of office. He said then, Delaware can get another senator, but my boys can't get another father. However, great men like Ted Kennedy, Mike Mansfield, Hubert Humphrey, men who have been tested in their own right, convinced him to serve. He was sworn in the hospital at my bedside. As a single parent, he decided to be there, to put us to bed, to be there when we woke up from a bad dream, to make us breakfast. So he traveled to and from Washington 4 hours a day. 5 years later, we, my brother, dad, and I married my mom, Jill. And they together rebuilt our family. And 36 years later, he still makes that trip. So even though Dad worked in Washington, he's never been part of Washington. He always sounded like the kid from Scranton, Pennsylvania that he is. And even that is a story of overcoming. Now, some people poke fun at my dad talking too much. What a lot of people don't know, though, is that when he was a young boy, he had a severe stutter. The kids called him Dash, not because he was fast in the football field, which he was, but like a dash at the end of a sentence you can't finish. But now he speaks with a clear and strong voice. He says what needs to be said, and he does what needs to be done. When domestic violence was often a dark secret, Dad wrote the Violence Against Women Act, which gave countless women the protection and support and protection and a new chance at life. When crime was spiking in our communities, Dad wrote the crime bill that put 100,000 cops on our streets and led to an 8-year drop in the crime across America. And when Serbian thugs were committing genocide in the Balkans, Dad didn't hesitate to call Slobodan Milosevic a war criminal to his face, and to convince Congress and our allies to act. He's willing to speak truth to power, to the White House and to world leaders. I know my father will be a great vice president. As I mentioned, my dad has always been there for me, my brother, my sister, every day. But because of other duties, it won't be possible for me to be here this fall, to stand by him the way he stood by me. So I have something to ask of you. Be there for my dad, like he was for me. Be there for Barack Obama, because our country needs him. Be there for both of them, because millions of families need to know that their best days aren't behind them, but are ahead of them. Be there for both of them, because millions of people are trying to overcome just like my dad overcame. Be there. Be there because Barack Obama and Joe Biden will deliver America the change we so desperately need. Please join me in welcoming my friend, my father, my hero, the next Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Amid rumors, Senator Obama will make an unannounced cameo after Senator Biden's acceptance speech, which we'll bring you in a second. This was the scene about 23 minutes past the hour, right here at our MSNBC headquarters. Senator Obama in that vehicle right there, headed in the general direction of the Pepsi Center. Those rumors may have just been given great credibility. We take you now back to the Pepsi Center and Senator Biden's vice presidential nominating acceptance speech.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you, John Kerry. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thanks. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. You know, folks, my dad used to have an expression. He'd say, a father knows he's a success when he turns and looks at his son or daughter and know that they turned out better than he did. I'm a success. I'm a hell of a success. Bowie, I love you. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of the son you become. I'm so proud of the father you are. And I'm also so proud of my son Hunter and my daughter Ashley. And my wife Jill, the only one who leaves me both breathless and speechless at the same time. It's an honor to share this stage tonight with President Clinton, a man who I think brought this country so far along that I only pray we do it again. And last night it was moving to watch Hillary, one of our great leaders, a great leader of this party, a woman who has made history and will continue to make history. A colleague, my friend, Senator Hillary Clinton. And I am truly honored to live in a country with the bravest warriors in the world. And I'm honored to represent the first state, my state, the state of Delaware. Since I've never been called a man of few words, let me say it as simply as I can. Yes, I accept your nomination to run and serve with Barack Obama, the next President of the United States of America. And let me make this pledge to you right here and now. For every American who is trying to do the right thing, for all those people in government who are honoring the pledge to uphold the law and honor the Constitution, no longer will you hear the 8 most dreaded words in the English language. The Vice President's office is on the phone. Barack and I took very different journeys to this destination. but we share a common story. Mine began in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and then Wilmington, Delaware. My dad, who fell on hard times, always told me, though, champ, when you get knocked down, get up. Get up. I was taught that by my dad. And God, I wish my dad was here tonight. But I thank God and I'm grateful that my mom, Catherine Eugenia Finnegan Biden, is here tonight. Mom, I love you. You know, my mom taught her children, all the children who flock to our house, that you're defined by your sense of honor and you're redeemed by your loyalty. She believes that bravery lives in every heart, and her expectation is that it will be summoned. Failure at some point of your life is inevitable, but giving up is unforgivable. As a child, I stuttered. And she lovingly would look at me and tell me, Joey, it's because you're so bright you can't get the thoughts out quickly enough. When I was not as well dressed as the other kids, she'd look at me and say, Joey, oh, you're so handsome, honey, you're so handsome. And when I got knocked down by guys bigger than me, and this is the God's truth, she sent me back out and said, bloody their nose so you can walk down the street the next day. And that's what I did. You know, and after the accident, she told me, she said, Joey, God sends no cross that you cannot bear. And when I triumphed, my mother was quick to remind me it was because of others. My mother's creed is the American creed. No one is better than you. Everyone is your equal, and everyone is equal to you. My parents taught us to live our faith and to treasure our families. We learned the dignity of work, and we were told that anyone can make it if they just try hard enough. That was America's promise. And for those of us who grew up in middle-class neighborhoods like Scranton and Wilmington, that was the American dream. Ladies and gentlemen, but today, that American dream feels like it's slowly slipping away. I don't have to tell you that. You feel it every single day in your own lives. I've never seen a time when Washington has watched so many people get knocked down without doing anything to help them get back up. Almost every single night, I take the train home to Wilmington, Delaware, sometimes very late. As I sit there in my seat and I look out that window, and I see those flickering lights of the homes that pass by, I can almost hear the conversation they're having at their kitchen tables after they put their kids to bed. Like millions of Americans, they're asking questions as ordinary as they are profound. Questions they never, ever thought they'd have to ask themselves. Should mom move into this now that dad's gone? $50, $60, $70 just to fill up the gas tank. How in God's name, with winter coming, how are we going to heat the home? Another year, no raise. Did you hear they may be cutting our health care at the company? Now we owe more money on our home than our home was worth. How in God's name were we going to send the kids to college? How are we going to retire, Joe? You know, folks, that's the America that George Bush has left us. And that's the America we'll continue to get if John McCain is elected President of the United States of America. Freudian slip. And folks, these are not isolated discussions among families down on their luck. These are common stories among middle-class people who've worked hard their whole life, played by the rules, on the promise that their tomorrows would be better than their yesterdays. That promise is the promise of America. It defines who we are as a people. And now it's in jeopardy. I know it, you know it, but John McCain doesn't seem to get it. Barack Obama gets it, though. Like many of us in this room, like many of us in this hall, Barack Obama has worked his way up. He is the great American story. You know, I believe the measure of a man is not the road he travels, but the choices he makes along that road. And ladies and gentlemen, Barack Obama could have done anything after he graduated from college. With all his talent and promise, he could have written his own ticket to Wall Street. But what did he choose to do? He chose to go to Chicago, the South Side of Chicago. There in the South Side, he met women and men who had lost their jobs. Their neighborhood was devastated when the local steel plant closed. Their dreams had to be deferred. Their self-esteem was gone. And ladies and gentlemen, he made their lives the work of his life. That's what you do when you're raised by a single mom who worked, went to school, and raised 2 kids of her own. That's how you come to believe to the very core of your being that work is more than a paycheck. It's dignity. It's respect. It's about whether or not you can look your child in the eye and say, we're going to be all right. Because Barack Obama made that choice, 150 more children and parents have health care in Illinois. He fought to make that happen. And because Barack Obama made that choice, working families in Illinois pay less taxes, and more people have moved from welfare to the dignity of work, and he got it done. And when he came to Washington, John and I watched with amazement how he hit the ground running, leading the fight to pass the most sweeping ethics reform in a generation. He reached across party lines to pass a law that helped keep nuclear weapons out of the hands of terrorists. And then he moved Congress and the president to give our wonderful wounded warriors the care and dignity they deserve. You know, you can learn a lot about a man campaigning with him, debating him, seeing how he reacts under pressure. You learn about the strength of his mind, but even more importantly, you learn about the quality of his heart. I watched how Barack touched people, how he inspired them, and I realized he had tapped into the oldest belief in America. We don't have to accept the situation we cannot bear. We have the power to change it. And changing it is exactly what Barack Obama will do. That's what he'll do for this country. You know, John McCain is my friend, and I know you hear that phrase used all the time in politics. I mean it. John McCain is my friend. We've traveled the world together. It's a friendship that goes beyond politics. And the personal courage and heroism demonstrated by John still amazes me. But I profoundly disagree with the direction John wants to take this country, from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Amtrak to veterans. You know, John thinks that during the Bush years, quote, we've made great economic progress. I think it's been abysmal. And in the Senate, John has voted with President Bush 95%, and that is very hard to believe. And when John McCain proposes $200 million in new taxes for corporate America, $1 billion alone for the largest companies in the nation, but no relief for 100 million American families, that's not change, that's more of the same. Even today, as oil companies post the biggest profits in history, nearly $500 billion in the last 5 years. John wants to give them another $4 billion in tax breaks. That's not change. That's the same. And during the same time, John voted again and again against renewable energy, solar, wind, biofuels. That's not change. That's more of the same. Millions of Americans have seen their jobs go offshore. Yet John continues to support tax breaks for corporations that send them there. That's not change. That's more of the same. He voted 19 times against the minimum wage for people who are struggling just to make it to the next day. That's not change. That's more of the same. And when he says he'll continue to spend $10 billion a month, when the Iraqis have a surplus of nearly $80 billion, that's not change. That's more of the same. The choice in this election is clear. These times require more than a good soldier. They require a wise leader. A leader who can change the change that everybody knows we need. Barack Obama is going to deliver that change, because I want to tell you, Barack Obama will reform our tax code. He will cut taxes for 95% of the American people who draw a paycheck. That's the change we need. Barack Obama will transform the economy by making alternative energy a national priority, and in the process creating 5 million new jobs, and finally, freeing us from the grip of foreign oil. That's the change we need. Barack Obama knows that any country that out-teaches us today will out-compete us tomorrow. That's why he'll invest in the next generation of teachers and why he'll make college more affordable. That's the change we need. Barack Obama will bring down health care costs by $2,500 for the average family, and at long last deliver affordable, accessible health care for every American. That's the change we need. Barack will put more cops on the street, put security back in Social Security, and he'll never, ever, ever give up until we achieve equal pay for women. That's the change we need. And as we gather here tonight, our country is less secure and more isolated than it has been any time in recent history. The Bush foreign policy has dug us into a very deep hole with very few friends to help us climb out. And for the last 7 years, the administration has failed to face the biggest forces shaping this century. The emergence of Russia, China, and India as great powers, the spread of lethal weapons, the shortage of secure supplies of energy, food, and water, the challenge of climate change, and the resurgence of fundamentalism in Afghanistan and Pakistan, the real central front in the war on terror. Ladies and gentlemen, recent years and in recent days, we've once again seen the consequences of this neglect, with Russia challenging the very freedom of the new democratic country of Georgia. Barack and I will end that neglect. We will hold Russia accountable for its actions, and we will help the people of Georgia rebuild. I've been on the ground in Georgia, Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and I can tell you in no uncertain terms, this administration's policy has been an abysmal failure. America cannot afford 4 more years of this failure. And now, despite being complicit in this catastrophic foreign policy, John McCain says Barack
Barack Obama is not ready to protect our national security. Now let me ask you this. Whose judgment do you trust? Should you trust the judgment of John McCain when he said only 3 years ago, Afghanistan, we don't read about it anymore in the papers because it succeeded? Or should you believe Barack Obama, who said a year ago, we need to send 2 more combat battalions to Afghanistan? The fact of the matter is, Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, the people who actually attacked us on 9/11, they've regrouped in the mountains between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and they are plotting new attacks. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has echoed Barack's call for more troops. John McCain was wrong, and Barack Obama was right. Should we trust John McCain's judgment when he rejected talking with Iran and then asked, what is there to talk about? Or Barack Obama, who said, we must talk and make clear to Iran that it must change? Now, after 7 years of denial, even the Bush administration recognizes that we should talk to Iran because that's the best way to ensure our security. Again and again, John McCain has been wrong and Barack Obama is right. Should we trust John McCain's judgment when he says we can't have no timelines to draw down our troops from Iraq, that we must stay indefinitely? Or should we listen to Barack Obama, who says shift the responsibility to the Iraqis and set a time to bring our combat troops home? Now, after 6 long years, the administration and the Iraqi government are on the verge of setting a date to bring our troops home. John McCain was wrong and Barack Obama was right. Again and again, on the most important national security issues of our time, John McCain was wrong and Barack Obama has been proven right. Folks, remember when the world used to trust us, when they looked to us for leadership? With Barack Obama as our president, they'll look at us again, they'll trust us again, and we'll be able to lead again. Folks, Jill and I are truly honored to join Michelle and Barack on this journey. When I look at their young children, when I look at my grandchildren, I know why I'm here. I'm here for their future. I'm here for everyone I grew up with in Scranton and Wilmington. I'm here for the cops and the firefighters, the teachers and the assembly line workers, the folks whose lives are the very measure of whether the American dream endures. Our greatest presidents, from Abraham Lincoln to Franklin Roosevelt to John Kennedy, they all challenged us to embrace change. Now it is our responsibility to meet that challenge. Millions of Americans have been knocked down, and this is a time, as Americans together, we get back up together. Our debt to our parents and our grandparents is too great. Our obligation to our children is too sacred. These are extraordinary times. This is an extraordinary election. The American people are ready. I am ready. Barack is ready. This is his time. This is our time. This is America's time. God bless America, and may God protect our troops. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, stand by for what we expect will happen here shortly after we saw Senator Obama speeding in the general direction of that building about 25, 30 minutes ago. A cap for the night after Joe Biden spent 8.5 minutes, roughly, of his acceptance speech talking about the flaws in John McCain. He had many things in the script that made great impact. He had many, many statements that seemed to be the red meat that had been supposedly lacking throughout the first 3 days and nights of this convention. But perhaps the thing that resonated the best was a Freudian slip, as he described it, when he, and I think it was truly inadvertent, referred to the future that John McCain will give us. Best Freudian slip he ever made.
Tonight, we have a very special surprise guest.
Who?
Hello, Democrats! I just wanted to come out here for a little something to say. I want everybody to now understand why I am so proud to have Joe Biden and Jill Biden and Beau Biden and Mama Biden and the whole Biden family with me on this journey to take America back. I think the convention's gone pretty well so far. What do you think? I think Michelle Obama kicked it off pretty well, don't you think? If I'm not mistaken, Hillary Clinton rocked the House last night. And just in case you were wondering, I think President Bill Clinton reminded us of what it's like when you've got a president who actually puts people first. Thank you, President Clinton. Now, we are going to be moving to Mile High Stadium tomorrow. And I want to let you know why. At the start of this campaign, we had a very simple idea, which is change in America doesn't start from the top down, it starts from the bottom up. That change is brought about because ordinary people do extraordinary things. And so we want to open up this convention to make sure that everybody who wants to come can join in the party and join in the effort to take America back. I think we are going to have a great night tomorrow night, and I look forward to seeing you there. God bless you. God bless America.
Bells ringing
occurs only slightly after the fact that we might have said to you that we had a spoiler alert when we said we saw Senator Obama drive right past our MSNBC headquarters here. So if we spoiled it for you, we apologize. It was unintentional. The structure of being able to pull off a couple of celebrations or a sequence of escalating celebrations throughout the course of a convention is a really dicey proposition. You can overdo it. They didn't take anything away from tomorrow by doing this tonight, did they, Chris?
No, and I think the people watching tonight are smart enough to know the difference between choreography and spontaneity. And what caught me tonight, and I'm sure a lot of people that grew up like me and live like me, was Jill Biden tonight, looking up to her husband with such pride. I think a lot of people have talked about, and we have, about really the new experience of having an African-American candidate of a major party and almost having the first woman. But in my little way, this is the first time we've had a regular guy from the neighborhood, a Northeastern regular guy, Catholic, familiar to me, whose parents wanted life to be better for him. And when he talked about that, I think a lot of people from the Northeast that grew up like I did said, I know that mother, I had a mother like that. He's lucky he still have his mother alive. My mom was like that. And it's very real to a lot of people, this family scene here. And this family's been through tragedy.
Indeed,
they've made up for it.
And even if it's not personally familiar to you, it at minimum has the advantage and the benefit of being a whole lot of them out there. It's a big, happy, boisterous, exuberant family led by that guy right there. And as much as that might risk taking a little of the edge off tomorrow, or perhaps creating an overshadowing effect to the speech that he gave, which was so much of what politically was lacking in this convention from the Democrats' point of view up to this point, it obviously, these images, these pictures are worth the proverbial 1,000 words and more.
I think the party we're watching tonight, we'll see the other party next week, may have an advantage here that's very deep in the American experience. And fairly or not, I think it may be fair, we'll see. The sense that the American people are different than other people. They don't believe that the way things are is the way they have to be. There's something essential in that American belief, as he expressed it, your mother's belief as you grew up, the way things are in your family, your economic status, your social status, is not the way it has to be. You can change it. That's so American. And I think the idea of changing an administration is so much a part of this convention here.
I realized, Biden said of Obama, he has tapped into the oldest American belief of all. We don't have to accept a situation we cannot bear. We have the power to change it. So officially, at least, the third night of the Democratic Convention is closed. The gathering will take place, at least for the big event here of the night, the two big events of the night. It's closed, and tomorrow and please note, if you think Barack Obama's sports fandom is a pose, only a veteran NFL fan would refuse to call the stadium he will speak in tomorrow, or accidentally not call it by its corporate name, Invesco, and refer to it the way they still like to call it here in Denver, Mile High Stadium. We begin football night in America in 2 weeks. Okay, enough of that. Let's bring in Rachel Maddow, who's here. All right, let's go back to what we saw from Joe Biden. Again, maybe the most impactful thing here was a typo, was a verbal, and the irony of that being that that's what he's so renowned for, if you will. Right. And this time it worked to his advantage. What else worked to his advantage or disadvantage?
Well, Joe Biden is an emotional guy, and when he got up there and he talked about how proud he was of his son, and he didn't start crying, but you saw the emotion in his face. You heard it in his voice when he described his mother and talked about his mother and looked at his mother in the stands. You saw the emotion there. He is an emotional guy. It's part of what makes him salt of the earth. It's part of what makes him likable. This wasn't a very emotional speech, even coming from an emotional guy. Ultimately, it was an indictment of John McCain, and he was doing the work that the campaign needs to do there in order to do right by this ticket. I think Obama coming on at the end, before this week, nobody would have thought of Joe Biden and Barack Obama as a team. You think of them as allies, maybe. But Biden didn't come out for Obama during the primary process. You didn't get the sense they didn't like each other, but we didn't think of them as a team. Seeing the families sort of merge there together, saying how much he's on board with the whole Biden clan, it is a cementing of the bond of these two. It is an absorption of the Biden family into the Obama family and vice versa. To see Michelle Obama crying along with the introduction that Beau Biden gave his father, it's an emotional bond that can't be doubted now.
The role of Joe Biden in this campaign, we saw it a little bit on Saturday. We saw the beginning of it, that there were references to McCain, again, always prefaced by this, I think, sincere description of the two as friends. But these are, again, some extraordinary words, and the quotes, I mean, perhaps the delivery here was not what it might have been. But to say this administration's policy has been an abysmal failure, America cannot afford 4 more years of this. Now, despite being complicit in this catastrophic foreign policy, John McCain says Barack Obama isn't ready to protect our national security. It seems to me that they can use that and evolve that and make it spin out for the next 69 days to great effect.
Well, when is the last time that you've heard it hollered in a full-throated way from the Democratic side at John McCain? John McCain was wrong, Barack Obama was right, again and again on the most important national security issues of our time. John McCain was wrong and Barack Obama was proven right. To say, you know what, John McCain's big weakness here is national security and it is Barack Obama's strength. That has been a pundit point. That has been a point that commentators have made. That has been a critic's point. That has not been the campaign's point until this point.
You know, I think Rachel responded to this. There's a couple lines I agree that weren't as powerfully delivered as they were written. And of course, it's very hard to hit every nail. This line, he said, he talked about if we get elected, the Democrats in this case, you won't ever hear this phrase in the English language. The vice president's office is on the phone. The enforcer. This is the first time in our history we've had a vice president with so much enormous power over intel, over foreign policy, over war making, to the point where you wonder, in fact, most people who have studied it, wonder if he would have gone to war in Iraq had we had a different vice president. That's the kind of power that is scary. The second point, this one here, I loved it. It wasn't delivered well by the candidate. It was very pointedly and well written. Do you remember when America was trusted?
Yeah.
That is a very tough question.
Folks, remember when the world used to trust us?
I wish he had slowed that down and indicted that with more power.
And you know, on the first point, Chris, to have had Cheney not come up very much in this convention is pretty remarkable, given what low-hanging fruit he is for
Good point
a Democratic
for Pat,
audience.
by the way.
Exactly.
I don't even talk about Guantanamo here.
Yeah. But what I think that for all of the targeting of McCain that we saw from Biden in the speech, he pulled that Cheney punch. It's making a joke about how scary Cheney is. It's not using Cheney's name. You have to know a lot about, you know, David Addington making calls from Cheney's office and what that might mean for your job in the Justice Department in order to get that joke. He didn't go right at Cheney. And I don't know why the Democrats are still pulling some punches, and if it wasn't going to happen tonight, I don't know that we should expect that it will happen tomorrow. If it's only going to happen from the down-ticket speeches that don't get on primetime, it may ultimately be a missed opportunity.
How about here's a question, a call for the vice president's office. We don't have enough intel to take us to war. Come up with something to the CIA.
Yeah.
That's a call that's probably been made a few times. Come up with tougher evidence. I want this war.
Well, you know, when Beau Biden introduced his father and said, my father had the courage to tell Slobodan Milosevic to his face that he was a war criminal. You know what? Americans want to talk about having been lied into war and how we can make sure this never happens again in this country. There hasn't been accountability. Nobody got fired for 9/11. One guy got fired for Katrina, and he was the Arabian horse guy. Nobody got fired for lying us into war in Iraq. George Tenet got the Medal of Freedom. Americans are mad about this stuff, and they want to hear that the Democratic Party gets it and is mad too and is going to fix it.
The one observation about talking on these topics is Democrats have been so slow to do this, generally speaking, for the last 2 years. And thus, if you're measuring progress on this in eyedroppers, The fact that Biden said for every American who is trying to do the right thing, for all those people in government who are honoring their pledge to uphold the law and respect our Constitution. That's the preface to the line you quoted, which I also circled here. No longer will the 8 most dreaded words in the English language be the Vice President's office is on the phone. It was in the 4th paragraph of the speech, after the thank yous and after the yes, I want to serve with Obama. The next thing was, we have a damn Constitution here, and we intend to enforce it. Now, you need to bring it out a little bit at a time. Better than not bringing it out at all.
Yeah.
All right. Stay with us. David Gregory is now back with us in the floor of the Pepsi Center with former Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle. David?
Keith, thanks very much. Senator Daschle, this week in many ways is about inching Barack Obama up the presidential scale, as some have said. Describe for me, in your view, how tonight an independent-minded voter in South Dakota or in Nevada or here in Colorado was persuaded that Obama inched up that scale.
Well, I think he was persuaded tonight, he or she, by the sincerity that you saw. Joe Biden spoke from his heart. He spoke about his family. He spoke about his own trials and tribulations and overcoming them. He talked about the need for change in ways that they really could understand from their hearts too. So this was a very, very heartfelt speech tonight that resonated not only in this audience, but across the country.
But that's the personal side, and I want to come back to that because I think it's significant with regard to Obama. But the notion that a former president would stand up here who has specifically criticized Barack Obama and said it's a roll of the dice to make him the president has been very tepid before tonight about whether he was prepared to be president. For a former president to say, yeah, this guy's got the goods, he can do the job. Is it persuasive?
David, I thought tonight was really sort of an answer to the critics from last night. I thought Hillary Clinton gave the speech of her life last night. But all through the day, I heard some comment about, well, you know, she could have said a little bit more about Barack Obama personally. Tonight, Bill Clinton hit it out of the park. He talked about the caliber and the qualities and the extraordinary leadership capacity of a Barack Obama in a way that only a former president could understand. So he was exactly on the mark in talking about the very concerns that others have raised in the past. This was a home run tonight.
So what is the challenge? Somebody near and dear to both of us, Tom Brokaw, talks about voters closing their eyes and imagining some president in the Oval Office when a crisis strikes. So tonight, in Senator Biden's speech was about the contrast between and judgment of McCain and Senator Obama. What, in your view, was accomplished through that?
Well, you know, David, I think tonight what I really liked about President Clinton's speech was that he reminded everybody that he was subject to many of the same concerns in 1992. People said, you know, he's not had experience. He doesn't really know Washington. He doesn't really have the kind of people around him. But he proved them wrong. He proved to be a very successful president. And so he reminded everybody tonight that Barack Obama comes with many of the same concerns, but he allayed those fears, those concerns tonight in a way that, again, only a former president can do.
Tactically now, put your political analyst hat on. If unity has been achieved in the course of this convention and this week, both on the floor here and behind the scenes between the Obamas and the Clintons, how does he use them in this campaign in a way that can go as far as possible toward Hillary Clinton delivering her base of support, not just women, but working class voters, to Obama by the fall?
Well, I think that both the Clintons can bring immense credibility to our message about change and about the importance of moving this country in a different direction. And they can do so by speaking to the 18 million people, first of all, that were supporters of Hillary Clinton throughout the primary process, but also, given the vast reservoir of goodwill they have with people around the country, say it in a way that is entirely believable and further augments the ability that Barack and Joe are going to have to say it themselves.
All right, Senator Daschle, thanks for stopping by and waiting while we got to you. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
David.
Gentlemen, back to you.
David Gregory, thank you. We can now report Senator Biden has left the building because, once again, sitting where we are, he just shot past in that direction with a motorcade. Coming up, Brian Williams and Tom Brokaw join us, plus Chuck Todd and our panel. You're watching MSNBC's continuing live coverage, Night 3 of the Democratic National Convention.
choice in this election is clear. These times require more than a good soldier. They require a wise leader.
Let me say it as simply as I can. Yes, I accept your nomination to run and serve with Barack Obama, the next president of the United States of America.
Denver, where moments ago the Democratic ticket appeared together on the convention stage for the first time. Barack Obama with an unplanned appearance after Joe Biden's acceptance speech. Let's turn now to NBC Nightly News anchor Brian Williams, along with Tom Brokaw and Chuck Todd, all three of our friends inside the Pepsi Center. And Brian, give me the vibe of that group hug out there on the stage a few moments ago.
Well, first of all, I was thinking of Dick Durbin from Illinois, the senior senator who played, I think, a larger role than he's letting on, perhaps being too modest by half, in coaxing this ticket into being. He had at least 2 substantial meetings with Barack Obama in the last days and weeks leading up to the selection, and provided an of-counsel role to the candidate. And second, as I said to Tom on the network as we were wrapping up our coverage tonight, after all the mishigas over the Clintons and Senator Clinton's speech last night and putting the nomination out tonight and President Clinton's speech tonight, when Barack Obama rounded that corner tonight, John McCain will have this moment next week in St. Paul. You come around the corner, you see all these people, you get it. It's your convention. That's your name on all those signs. That's what this is supposed to do. This was the first full-throated moment he's been able to enjoy of this convention thus far, having just arrived in Denver this afternoon.
Keith, I would suggest that perhaps the more important speech tonight than Joe Biden's was Bill Clinton's. Joe Biden and Bill Clinton both gave a kind of painting by the numbers speech in terms of the craftsmanship, but it was far more important for the former president of the United States, the last 2-term sitting president of the Democratic Party in anyone's memory, to come out and say all the right things about Barack Obama. Joe Biden's great value will be in the debates and on the campaign trail, and because of the heft that he'll bring to this ticket, given his experience in international affairs. He has been to the war zones, both Afghanistan and Iraq, probably more than any other senator. And I was also thinking about the contrast between a former president or an outgoing president and the incoming candidate, and the dilemma that John McCain faces next week. Far better for Barack Obama to get the warm embrace of Bill Clinton here tonight, and far more difficult for John McCain to get that same kind of an embrace from George Bush next week in St. Paul.
Chuck Todd, on the subject of embraces, again to that final tableau painted out on that stage there with the, as Rachel Maddow put it, the Biden and the Obama families merging. This may be the sort of the thematic point of the entire convention. One of the side thoughts here, though, has been where has the red meat been? There was a lot, there were 8.5 minutes as we by our clocks here of stuff about McCain in the Biden speech. Is the actual throwing of the red meat the last gesture of conciliation and unification of the Democrats in a common purpose against something? Is that being left to Barack Obama? Is it possible he'll be the one out there actually throwing the darts at the other candidate?
It would be hard to imagine that Obama would take on that role so strongly. But I have to say, it's a good thing Obama came out here tonight, because you could sense that it was a good energy level for Biden's speech. But Obama provided a charge because Biden's speech didn't really do that. It's my understanding, he was working with a new speechwriter that the campaign provided. He brought in his own speechwriters. And when you look at it, and I can actually tell by how you and Chris were dissecting it, you could tell that he wasn't comfortable with the text. All of the points he wanted to make were in there, but it wasn't fiery Biden. It wasn't as emotional as he can be. And Tom brought up a good point. Biden will be stronger on the stump because he's better off the cuff. He seemed restrained a bit tonight, and I think that had to do with just the fact he had a lot of probably too much input on a speech like this, but it was it just felt a little disjointed. He just didn't seem comfortable with the text.
Chuck, let me ask you about the calibration of these attacks. It seems to me, you check me on this, that there has been something of a decision to mute some of the charges. If you look back at the beginning of this campaign, the focus on the war in Iraq, the focus on the kind of a very stark critique of this administration on torture, on Abu Ghraib, on Guantanamo, on the whole array of issues that seem to drive, well, liberals and Democrats particularly to the polling places. Is there a decision somewhere in the mechanics of this convention not to go after Dick Cheney as hard as you could, not to go after Guantanamo, not to hit the bad intel that took us into Iraq?
Well, look, clearly this convention wasn't as much red meat as I think that they promised. Probably a little bit rawer meat than what was 4 years ago, but not a lot. And I think the problem is, look, Obama, this goes back to the primaries. Obama had always put himself a bit in a box. It's a new kind of politics. So he can go negative, but it always had to be sort of negative within a specific framework, which you got that sense tonight. You know, John McCain's my friend, but, you know, even the John Kerry speech on McCain, which frankly had a little more red meat to it than Joe Biden's, you know, it's interesting. I almost wonder, Joe Biden might have delivered the John Kerry speech with a lot more fire than John Kerry, and it might have potentially been more effective. I don't know.
So, Chuck, was this to some degree, in trying to analyze this text and not turning into a history lesson here, but it seemed to me there was a lot of stuff that had been reworked from the Saturday acceptance speech in the first gathering of the Biden and Obama ticket. There was a lot of stuff that had been reworked in its second form here tonight. Were there elements here? Was that bit about the joke about Cheney and the phone call and supporters of the Constitution in the fourth paragraph to see what people's reaction was, and that then if there was no recoil and you can't say that about the Vice President of the United States, if that then comes out as a you know, all guns blazing serious point on the in the next 69 days of the campaign.
Well, I'm not sure about that. The line wasn't delivered very well, so I don't know if it's even fair to judge it. You know, he kind of misspoke it. He kind of flubbed it, so we don't even know what the full impact of the line would be. But again, you saw there was sort of, you know, he had the repeat, the audience refrain stuff, and he had it in two different ways, two different places. Again, it just felt like you had a lot of speechwriters and a lot of ideas trying to be brought together. And that's what happens when you bring a new person onto the team. And right now, Biden's still the new guy. And you can kind of see that he's got sort of the new guy problems that you have sometimes when you bring him in.
Tom, the whole evening and the whole progression of this event. We were talking, Chris and I, before about what a dicey proposition it is to try to spread a theme throughout an entire convention and build to the accurate note of crescendo at the end. Are the Democrats in danger of not doing that? Or do they seem to have done it for the first three nights? You've been to so many of these things and seen that rhythm and ebb and flow. What do you think of this compared to other conventions?
Well, if I were to put this on a graph, I suppose I would say Monday, Tuesday, and then a little dip tonight. And then, of course, that sets the stage for Barack Obama. It all depends on him tomorrow night, given the venue that he has chosen, given his reputation for making the big speech, given the assignment that he knows that he has to reintroduce himself to America as a more fully formed candidate who is now the official nominee, who is prepared to sit in the Oval Office and take those telephone calls, dare I say it, at 3 in the morning and make the correct decisions and deal with his opposition. So that speech tomorrow night will really define this convention in the final analysis. Up to this point, they've accomplished most of what they'd like to do. Conventions are often not just about sending everybody out of here energized, but also do no harm. The Republicans have gotten themselves in trouble in the past few years, with some of the more strident speeches that have been made at their conventions. Both parties now are very careful in how they vet every speech that's made, every phrase. They control the delegations. In the final analysis, it depends on what the candidate has to say. You'll remember that 4 years ago, John Kerry had very good vibes as he left Boston, got on that bus and went to Scranton, Pennsylvania. You'll remember as well that Michael Dukakis, when he left in 1988 from Atlanta and then returned with a 17-point lead to Boston, Massachusetts, and spent the month of August worrying about civic affairs in Springfield, Mass., how that dwindled away from him. So tomorrow night's going to be the important one, and then it's a launch from here.
Brian, let me ask you one thing, and I'm going to try to take as much of the charge out of this and just ask you about campaign strategy from one side to the other. If one candidate were to be officially nominated and give his acceptance speech in front of 80,000 people at what he still calls Mile High Stadium, I'm not saying this is one particular party's candidate, but if one were to do that tomorrow and he was a significantly different figure than other presidential nominees have been in the past for some demographic purposes, would it behoove the other campaign from the other major party to leak out the vice presidential identity for its own ticket a day in advance of the formal announcement on Friday? Would you think that might be possible?
Perhaps you've been on the interwebs tonight. Perhaps that motivates your carefully calculated question, having taken any of the political sting out of it for me, and thank you very much, Keith. If one were trying to blunt such an outdoor speech in front of, say, columns, one would potentially start to spool out the excitement over maybe an 11 a.m. Friday morning announcement. By the way, with a Cat 3 hurricane heading to points unknown in the Gulf of Mexico. And Chuck Todd's been, to his everlasting credit, even though he used the word "rawr" on television tonight, and I'm surprised by that. I'll talk to him later. He's been banging this drum for the past 3 days that we could be in a split-screen America next week, and let's hope these predictions are wrong about this storm for the Republicans' big party. To your point about moving outdoors tomorrow night, the microphone's gone. It's in a briefcase. This venue is in effect over, and of course it sounds like that old song about packing up after the concert. Our men and women are working all through the night to get us over to the outdoor venue where we'll continue this tomorrow.
A question for the managing editor of the Nightly News. If you have to put together a news budget early next week or midweek, and you have to choose in the lead item between a Category 4 hurricane named Gustav coming up from the Gulf, and the selection of Governor Pawlenty as the vice presidential nominee of the Republican Party, what would come in first?
Well, it looks like as the calendar's going to have it, Chris, we're going to have the second answer first. We're going to have a Veep, and then we're going to have landfall either late in the weekend or early next week. So Mother Nature will take care of that. You've got to put, I suppose at the end of the day, and we're all in hypothetical land here, you got to put humans before politics, but you've also got to exert a whole lot of fairness and make sure all of our coverage, as you well know, is even Steven. So, boy, are we heading into an interesting week again. Let's hope all these weather models are wrong and the mountains of Haiti have shredded this storm beyond repair. But this is a dangerous season in more ways than one.
Well, Brian Williams, Tom Brokaw, and meteorologist Chuck Todd, great thanks to all three of you over there inside the Pepsi Center. We'll let them come over and pack you guys up as well. Thanks, gentlemen. Still ahead, Norah O'Donnell on our panel, plus a critical supporter of Senator Obama is Missouri Senator Claire McCaskill. You're watching MSNBC's coverage of the Democratic Convention live from here in Denver, Colorado.
Barack Obama gets it, though. Like many of us in this room, like many of us in this hall, Barack Obama has worked his way up. He is the great American story.
the Democratic National Convention. One Clinton, Senator Hillary Clinton, paving the way for the Democratic Party's nomination of Barack Obama for president. Another Clinton, former President Bill Clinton, endorsing Obama as a leader prepared for any challenge. All that in a surprise appearance by the presumptive, but not for much longer nominee, Senator Obama, to boot. The 2008 Democratic ticket together on stage in the convention hall tonight, even though it was not on the schedule. Senator Biden, in his acceptance speech, taking on the traditional running mate role of attacking the other guy.
Again and again, on the most important national security issues of our time, John McCain was wrong, and Barack Obama has been proven right.
Earlier, his wife having suspended the roll call, asking for the nomination of the man who defeated her in the primaries by acclamation. President Clinton making clear their work on Senator Obama's behalf was not done then.
Hillary told us in no uncertain terms that she is going to do everything she can to elect Barack Obama. That makes two of us.
And he added, in fact, that makes 18 million of us. Once he took the stage, the Democratic Party's official pick, just one in a very large crowd.
I want everybody to now understand why I am so proud to have Joe Biden and Jill Biden and Beau Biden and Mama Biden and the whole Biden family with me on this journey to take America back.
And good evening again from Denver, Colorado, and the Democratic National Convention. Alongside Chris Matthews, I'm Keith Olbermann. They'll cheer anything here.
Well, they're in the mood. Let's go to Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri, who, of course, was a very early backer of Senator Obama. Let me ask you about the role of the vice president, the current vice president in this campaign. We saw a very strong attack line here. I should say in a velvet glove a bit here, referring to the fact that the most dreaded words in the English language, the 8 most dreaded words are, the vice president's office is on the phone. I'm just looking at here a report of the Senate Intelligence Committee this summer, fresh information that the intelligence which led us into the war in Iraq was distorted at the top, in the word here, in particularly by the Vice President of the United States. How come this indictment is so muted against the Vice President if he in fact did put his thumb on the scale and take us into a war against our best interests, against the best intelligence at hand at the time? If those are the facts, why are they not a big part of the message of the Democratic Party in insisting on change?
Well, I think there is a big message to the Democratic Party about this president and vice president. You heard over and over again tonight, Chris, about the change in foreign policy. You heard President Clinton talk about restoring the luster to our Constitution. Believe me, everyone in America understands that this presidency and this president and vice president trampled our Constitution and misled the American people.
Let me ask you about the internals out there on the floor. You took a strong position on behalf of Senator Barack. You are a woman member of the United States Senator, a colleague of Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton. How are the intramurals working out now? On the surface, it looks very good. It looks harmonious. It seems to be a united party, especially if you count the delegates. How about among the heavy hitters in the U.S. Senate? Are you all getting along better than you were 2 months ago?
You know, it is not just a picture of unity, it is real unity, and we are all getting along. I'm looking around this building tonight, and I see so many long faces, and it's all the media, because we're about to close a chapter on one of the most interesting political contests in American history. And I know it's hard to give it up, guys, but we're going to have to move on. We are united. Barack Obama is our nominee, and the Clintons are going to campaign hard for him, and we're all getting along.
Are you saying that the media tries to do a good job in covering human conflict?
I'm saying the media has a human nature that loved this race for all the right reasons, Chris. Everyone was interested in it. We had the first viable woman candidate, the first viable black candidate. We had unprecedented participation. We had a 50-state primary and caucus process. I mean, what's not to love about that kind of democracy? And of course, everybody wants to write about it and kind of wants it to keep going because it was so interesting. But it's time now. It's time now to quit talking about it, move on, and be focused on the very simple question. Do you like how it is right now? If you do, John McCain's your guy.
Is Missouri the show-me state?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Has it been
Missouri
shown?
is the show-me state.
Has it been shown tonight and this week by your party? Have you made the case to carry Missouri?
I don't think we've finished making the case. We have a lot more work to do, especially in rural America. You know, we've been on defense in rural America on some of the social issues. We need to be on offense. This man, John McCain, has been no friend to the farmer. He's been no friend to rural America. He doesn't understand that the small communities in America have been hit even harder by his policies of just worrying about Wall Street and big oil. And we've got to take it to these rural communities and make sure they understand this election is about their pocketbook, their wallet, and their checkbook.
Senator McCaskill, the idea of the Democrats being on defense might apply to a point that Chris was making earlier and Rachel Maddow and I have been making, that there is such anger and a deep sense of personally inflicted pain by so many in the electorate. Do you think, and this doesn't, I'm not criticizing you in saying this, but do you think that Democrats in the public eye, the forefront of the party, have done enough with enough pointed language and with enough, frankly, anger in their voices to make the difference clear between electing another Republican and, in the simplest terms, not electing another Republican president?
Well, I think that we are following our leader, which is Barack Obama. And you know what he's going to be? He's going to be authentic. And this is not a red meat, attack dog politician, old school style. Now, there will be many of us that will draw sharp contrast between now and November. But what Barack Obama is going to do, it's just not words to him about a different kind of politics. He is going to continue to try to lift people up, particularly bubbling up from the bottom instead of all the people in Washington dictating. And he is going to try to run a campaign that inspires people. And I hope he continues to do that because that's who he is, and he needs to be authentic.
Is there a risk, as inspiring as he is, as obviously charismatic and personable and filled with ideas as he is, that it's not enough to be merely inspiring at a time like this in American history?
Listen, I don't think there's a risk ever to being inspiring. I mean, look what he has done. He's mobilized thousands and millions of new voters. He's got my kids and all the kids their age across the country out there working and really hustling for him. It is a wonderful thing to see. So I think there's nothing that Barack Obama is doing wrong. What we just have to do is continue to communicate clearly to people that John McCain is George Bush, and especially talk about his economic policies that are going to continue to pummel the middle class in this country. And if we are good at that, if we are sure that we get that message out there, we're going to win in November.
Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, guys.
Up next, Newsweek's Richard Wolff in our campaign listening post, the latest scuttlebutt from the campaign and the insiders, plus Norah O'Donnell and our panel reaction to tonight's speeches and what's at stake for Obama in his acceptance speech at Mile High Stadium tomorrow night. This is MSNBC's coverage of the Democratic Convention live from Denver.
These are common stories among middle-class people who've worked hard their whole life, played by the rules, on the promise that their tomorrows would be better than their yesterdays. That promise is the promise of America. It defines who we are as a people. And now it's in jeopardy. I know it, you know it, but John McCain doesn't seem to get it.
We rejoin you with MSNBC's coverage of the Democratic Convention live from Denver. Night number 3, nearing an end. Newsweek's Richard Wolff And our campaign listening post joins us now. Richard, good evening.
Good evening, Keith.
All right, so the Obama camp had a series of vitally important speeches, totally out of their own control in this first 3 days of the convention. Obviously, the acceptance speech will not be the case by any stretch of the imagination tomorrow. What was their assessment of what they got from Bill Clinton tonight after the great performance from Hillary Clinton last night?
Well, remember this, as I said earlier, this was not a speech that they vetted, controlled, or even saw until about 90 minutes before it was delivered, and they were delighted with President Clinton's approach, his tone, not just obviously talking about himself and his record, but the way he talked about Barack Obama being ready to be commander-in-chief, and also taking the attack to the Republicans. This was a night when they really tried to ramp up the attacks. In the words of one senior Obama aide, they were trying to take the wood to John McCain. They felt they did it tonight, and criticism aside about how comfortable Joe Biden was with his own speech, they thought they hit the mark more than they have on other nights.
Does this suggest, if they were comfortable with particularly what Biden did, and certainly President Clinton did some of this, but Biden did 8.5 minutes worth of, at least, more than half of his speech was about John McCain. Phrasing like, this administration's policy has been an abysmal failure, America cannot afford 4 more years of this. Now, despite being complicit, which is a war crimes term, complicit in this catastrophic foreign policy, John McCain says Barack Obama isn't ready to protect our national security. If they think that was taking the wood to McCain, does this mean that we're going to see, now we're hearkening back to the 2004 debates, we're going to see some more wood?
I think that's Joe Biden's role here. You heard 2 things from Joe Biden today, and really they weren't focused on what we all reported on when he was first picked, the foreign policy piece of this. We heard about his family story. Clearly, his mother, very important there, the family tragedy that he overcame. Very compelling piece, and of course about his own childhood, growing up, of very modest means. And then we heard the extensive, repeated, sustained attacks on John McCain. That is Joe Biden's role, to do those 2 things in the Rust Belt states. That's what the campaign is promising.
And we'll see if he amps up the volume a little bit on that in different circumstances, because as Chris and Rachel pointed out, he is so much better in small groups. Richard Wolff of Newsweek at the Campaign Listening Post inside the Pepsi Center. Thank you, Richard. Let's check back in now with Norah O'Donnell and our panel. Norah.
Keith, thank you very much. And of course, after Barack Obama surprised that convention crowd tonight, he took a trip across town over to Mile High Stadium to get a walkthrough of the field, to get a sense of where he will be making this speech tomorrow night, accepting the Democratic nomination, and also speaking on the 45th anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King. Very interesting. He gave a couple interviews today where he said the speech tomorrow night is going to be more workmanlike, that he is not aiming for a lot of high rhetoric, that he really wants people to understand how he would help middle-class families. And at the same time, he's saying that he wants to connect with people in this speech. Republicans are already making the argument that the setting shows that he's elitist. They're calling it the Temple of Doom because of the setting. What about that, Eugene?
Well, the Temple, they're calling it that because there were some columns apparently set up where
but
he's
it looks like a miniature Greek temple.
Well, it kind of looks like where George Bush accepted his nomination in 2004, which was also like a temple with columns. So it's kind of a difficult criticism to make. I also think, if I were Barack Obama, I would be careful about dialing back the rhetoric too far. Look where it's gotten him. Look at how he is connected with people from Iowa to now, by reaching them with words that paint a vision of a better country and a better future.
Rachel, why is it that he's saying that?
Why would you not do that if
yeah,
you
but
could do
it's interesting. Though, why is he saying that, though, that he needs a more workmanlike speech?
He's trying to dial back expectations. If he says, I'm going to go for all the high notes, I'm really going to try to inspire America, then all it takes is one malapropism and everybody considers it a failure. I think he's trying to dial back expectations. But right now, Democrats, after Joe Biden's speech, which did go after McCain, but was not as brutal as it could have been, we've got 1 day left of the convention, and right now, maybe the expectations that matter is that Democrats want to hear John McCain taken apart. And it's hard for the nominee himself to be the guy who does that. Right. But I think that expectation is on the speech.
Well, don't forget we're going to hear from Al Gore tomorrow night, who is not shy. Who is not shy about, as Pat Buchanan says, gutting someone.
Right, you can expect that from Al Gore, I think, but thus far, I think you find in Rush Limbaugh far more savage attacks on John McCain than you heard from the Democratic Party. How many times tonight, here's a Democratic Party and convention assembled, consists of true believers, ideologues, people who believe we are the angels of light, we're fighting the angels of darkness. They want to get up and cheer the condemnation of the other side. How many times did we see this crowd waiting to be drawn up to its feet, cheering and roaring for minutes on end? How many times did it rise?
I think
tomorrow night, wait a minute, let me talk about tomorrow night. Barack Obama cannot do this kind of work. He is supposed to, others were supposed to show the forces of darkness. He's supposed to show the inspiration, the sunny uplands. That's where we're headed. He's dialing it back. I'll tell you why. They're reacting to the Republican criticism of Berlin and all that, the grandiloquence, the one, Moses, all those things. He's got a very, very tough job tomorrow. You better hope. I do think Al Gore could do the job we have not seen done tonight.
You know, I think Barack Obama has shown he can give a good speech. He can pitch a speech correctly, pitch a speech to the occasion. Here's what I think Democrats might really want to think about. When we get to the Republican convention next week, I can pretty much guarantee that we're going to hear much tougher attacks on Barack Obama. We're not going to hear reserve. They're going to try their best to take him apart.
The question that we have debated on this panel from day one, has this Democratic Party in some ways failed to win over the swing voters that Barack Obama will need? Or was that not the aim of this convention?
I think it has not. I genuinely believe it has not reached the ones they need to reach and move, which are working class folks and folks like that who want to hear the case made. Let me tell you something. You will not hear. Every single speaker gets up, talks about John McCain, what a wonderful guy, my friend, terrific fellow. You're not going to hear a nice word about Barack Obama's history at the Republican convention.
What they're trying to do is reach the independents and the Obamacans who might think that John McCain's a nice guy, but have some issues with his position.
And we will be watching for that, and we will be watching for that tomorrow night. Clearly a big speech. Keith, I'm going to send it back to you.
All right, Nora, and our panel, great thanks. We'll check back in with you in the next hour. 3 days nearly behind us here in Denver. Has the stage been set for Senator Obama's speech tomorrow night, and how? This is MSNBC's continuing coverage of the Democratic Convention live from Denver.
Last night, Hillary told us in no uncertain terms that she is going to do everything she can to elect Barack Obama.
One more to go. This historic primary battle drawing to a close with an acclamation of support for Barack Obama's candidacy this evening inside the Pepsi Center. Strong speeches tonight by President Clinton and Vice Presidential nominee Joe Biden, setting the stage for Obama's big speech at Mile High Stadium tomorrow night. I'm Chris Matthews alongside Keith Olbermann, and we're live up here in the tower. Let's bring in MSNBC political analyst Michelle Bernard. Michelle, everyone's talked to me today about what you said last night about the challenges facing women in America, including professional women like yourself, and what last night meant. What did tonight mean to you in terms of those two families apparently bonding, in the words of Rachel Maddow, coming together? Tell me about your view of the whole thing tonight.
Well, you know, the words that really resonated with me tonight was when Joe Biden was talking about America's promise, and it left me sitting back thinking, what exactly is America's promise? And I do believe fundamentally that Democrats and Republicans want the best for the country, and right now what our country needs to figure out is who's going to do the best job of getting us there. It was wonderful to see Joe Biden speak so emotionally in terms of his family, the wife that he lost, the daughter that he lost. To look up and see Michelle Obama brought to tears in hearing Joe Biden's story, looking out at Mama Biden, as I think I heard somebody call her earlier today, and the theme that we have been hearing from the Democratic Party all week long is about children and really about health care. The other thing I thought about was we keep hearing health care, health care, health care, health care. And I'm wondering if, at least for Democrats, if health care is the next civil rights issue for our nation.
What do you think about, well, there's so many new frontiers being passed and crossed tonight. There you have the vice presidential running mate, a white guy, African-American guy coming in as his senior partner at the end of the night's program. He spoke in support of the senior member of the partnership. A middle-class guy. I mean, I'm very familiar with his background. It's like my own. It just struck me in a different way. But tell me how it struck you, this partnership here, this new partnership.
I like the partnership. I got to tell you a quick story. I went to an event a few years ago, a book signing with one of my colleagues, who is a white woman author, and I heard two elderly women speaking. It was right after Katrina. Two elderly women speaking from the South, and one of the women says to a girlfriend of hers, "Oh, does Michelle work for Charlotte?" And the lady said, "No, Charlotte works for her." And the other lady said, "My, things really have changed." And that's what I thought when I saw Biden and Obama tonight. The country has changed. If Barack Obama is elected president of the United States, it will be something that we have never seen in our nation's history. And I think most people, Republicans or Democrats, are going to rally around the next president. And if it is Barack Obama, we will be a model for the world.
Tell me about the spouses, in this case, the wives. I mean, I was overwhelmed by Jill Biden tonight.
Absolutely.
She's obviously a very attractive, very accomplished person. She has her PhD in education. She's a very serious educator. But just as a spouse, I was overwhelmed. And then, of course, Michelle Obama. Tell me about that from your perspective.
Well, you know, you just think about a mother's love. I mean, she married Joe Biden when he had two children, from his previous marriage, and they're obviously a very close-knit family. After the end of everything, and when Senator Obama came out to speak, I was struck because I could, their mics were still on, and I could hear Mrs. Biden saying, "Where's Bo? Where's Bo? Get Bo." I mean, this is clearly a mother-son relationship. I loved when the son said that he and his brother and his father married Jill. It was just a very touching moment, and again, it kept making me think about Joe Biden saying America's promise, and I would imagine that most Americans tonight are thinking, what is America's promise? We always talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the big question tonight is, how do we get there? Will the Republicans get there, or will the Democrats get us there? And I think that Joe Biden made a very important impact tonight on getting us set on the right path to think about what's the next step in our nation's evolution.
I thought another picture tonight that grabbed me, perhaps another derivative of this, was watching former President Clinton and Senator Clinton standing in a kind of a supportive role to this other couple of couples.
Yes.
What did you think watching them in the stands, basically watching this? I was very taken with the fact they stayed, they watched, they supported, they rooted for what was happening.
Yeah, I thought that was very impressive. Frankly, watching Senators Obama and Biden and their families on the stage reminded me of the Gores and the Clintons on stage when President Clinton was first elected to the White House. There was a young, happy couple, and it was nice to just see them there together tonight. Both of them, Mrs. Clinton hit the ball out of the park last night in her speech. I think that President Clinton did a fantastic job tonight, and I think that the fact that they were there together as a team with their daughter, another American family, in support of these two American families is a great story of American success.
What are people saying to you, Michelle? I mean, this is a big time for you. I know you've been a big part of all this television of the last week and of this last year. Are people coming up to you and asking you about your role now?
No, not really asking me about my role. Mostly people have been walking up to me and just and asking about some of the analysis that they have seen on the air, and really just talking about the future of the nation and how proud. I'm hearing a lot from people, particularly African Americans, and so many of the people that are here watching tonight with us about how proud they are of where our nation has come, and about this feeling of of change, and that our time has finally come.
Well, I have to tell you, every time I interview you, I'm taken with the novelty. I'm always trying to figure you out politically and trying to figure out where to put you, but I can't do it. That's a success on your part. Thank you very much, Michelle Bernard, for joining us tonight. Keith.
I got a Jill Biden story for you. We're talking about Jill Biden.
Jill Biden. Yes.
Joe Biden. This is a story from last August. Remember the AFL-CIO forum in Chicago?
Yes.
All right. I moderated this thing. It was about
Soldier Field.
Right, and it was about 950 50 degrees, something like that, in the middle of August, and we're all dressed up in suits. There was a woman there who was sitting, and I was reminded of this by one of our producers, Ewan Riley, was sitting next to her and standing next to her on stage throughout this entire debate because she kept going out during the breaks, during the commercial breaks, to visit with Joe Biden, and none of us knew who she was. And a couple of us thought, well, she must be like the makeup artist or the It was Jill Biden. She never identified herself to anybody as the wife of the candidate. She just wanted to be out there so she could go out and, you know, suggest something to him or be a little support or get him a glass of water or whatever it was. She was out there almost anonymously as the support for her husband.
Backing up the point of how game she was to help her spouse. We were out there for Lance Armstrong, that race they do out there, the famous race they held in Iowa, blazing out there in the summer. There she was in full bike riding togs, just one of the people racing, just because it might in some small way help the cause.
And the New York Times had reported about Jill Biden over the weekend that when her students would ask her if she's Senator Biden, you're Dr. Biden, what's all that about? She usually tells them that they're related to each other because she doesn't want them to think of her as anything but their English teacher.
Can I top it?
Sure, go ahead.
I'm in Ocean City, New Jersey, where I spent my summers growing up with my brother, my great Republican brother, Jim, and we're over there having a breakfast. You know, guys like to have this little breakfast alone at the diner.
Absolutely.
At 7:30 in the morning. We go in there, and there's very few people around. The regulars are there, and we're talking politics. And we say hello to the waitress who's taking the order. She's a very nice lady. And we're talking politics. She said, "Hi, I'm Joe Biden's sister-in-law." It's Jill's sister. These are regular people. Yep. And when Joe Biden comes out this week that his entire net worth, after a lifetime, and he's in his 60s, mid-60s, a lifetime of achievement, and his entire net worth is $150,000 total, including what the value he has on the house. He's a regular guy. He has a sister-in-law who's a waitress. These are not pretending to be regular people. These are.
And think in terms of trying to set this up as Obama as the product of a very hard-working group of lower middle class people. Biden in that group, still upper middle class, I guess would be where he is, and a man who takes the train home every night to see his family. How American is that? That's America of the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Dad's coming home on the train. Now, that's another one. It almost is. Yeah. All right, this was the night the Democrats got tough with John McCain. In their opinion, certainly tough enough. When we return, highlights from one of the toughest speeches of the night from Senator John Kerry. You're watching MSNBC's live coverage of the Democratic Convention in Denver.
First, to support Barack Obama. And second, I'm here to warm up the crowd for Joe Biden.